this reading inspire you? Chapter 29. You're going somewhere beautiful. January 1998. As my parents and I got into the car at Los Angeles International Airport, my mom called her voicemail to retrieve messages. There was one from the nurse at my grandmother's nursing home. "Sue, please call me right away," the message said. "It's about your mother." I had met my parents in London to spend a few days together over the Christmas holidays. We hadn't seen each other since the Dharma Yatra, the spiritual pilgrimage tour, had left LA in July. It was now 10 months since I'd taken a 1-year leave of absence from Stanford, and nearly 5 months since I'd be back in India after the Dharma Yatra. I hadn't wanted to come back to America yet. I had planned just to see my parents in London, but I had to deal with my university status and tend to my belongings in storage. I knew when I first took the leave of absence that it was a ruse to ease into the truth that I was moving to India. Keeping up the myth of moving back to California felt like a comedy routine in which a man is sitting with one foot on a dock and the other on a boat, and the boat starts drifting to sea. Inattentively straddling the dock and the drifting boat, he ends up in the water. I couldn't keep one foot in California and the other in India without eventually falling into the ocean of my own consciousness. I had to take my foot off the dock and put it into the sailing boat. So I planned to drive to the Bay Area to empty out my storage unit. It made no sense to keep paying monthly rent to store items I wasn't coming back to. My mom picked up her car phone. At the time, she had one of those phones that attached to the console between the front seats. I wonder if any of you remember those. I was much too young. And called the nursing home. "We're coming now," she said, and hung up. Grandma was in a coma, and they said she likely wouldn't live for a few more days, or for more than a few days. We drove together down to Laguna Hills in what was, by our internal clocks, still on British time, the middle of the night. My mom had been diagnosed with virulent breast cancer a few months earlier and had undergone aggressive chemo and radiation that autumn. Now her mom was dying. My grandmother had been dying for several years, it seemed. She had had colon cancer, then 2 or 3 heart attacks, each leaving her weaker and weaker. Despite her failing body, however, her mind had remained sharp, and she had refused to loosen her clenched grip of control. The story is still told today of how she corrected the nurses on one wrong digit of her social security number while being wheeled into surgery. Now she lay in bed, all but her face covered with a white sheet, her thin grey hair pulled away from her face, her eyes closed and her head drooping loosely onto the right side. The nurses gave us the details of her lapse into incoherency. We stood silent, each of us reaching out to touch a part of her through the sheet. "You should get home," I told my parents after we stood for a while at my grandmother's bedside. "I'll stay with Grandma." "There's no need," the nurse said. "There is nothing she needs, nothing to be done. She probably won't wake from the coma." We stood over my grandma's bed, her already tiny frame appearing to disappear beneath the sheet. She seemed to be in a deep sleep. "I want to stay," I told the nurse. "Can I?" After unsuccessful attempts to convince me that I didn't really want to stay, they made arrangements for me to sleep in a room across the hallway. After my parents left, I closed the door to my grandma's room and crawled into the bed with her. The hospital bed was large and her frame was tiny. I got in on the far side of her bed, away from the door, so it might not be so obvious should someone look through the window of her room. My grandmother was on her back, and her head dropped away from me. I reached out and stroked her face, pulling soft gray hairs off her forehead and smoothing them back with my palm. "It's okay, Grandma. Don't be afraid. Where you're going is beautiful. You will not disappear into nothingness. I promise. You're just going to be without the pain of this body. You will still be here. Nothing is happening to you. It's just happening to this old and sick body. Please don't worry. I promise where you're going is really, really beautiful." I spoke from a place in me I didn't know existed. Since when was I so sure? How did I know? The I with which I identified didn't know. Yet there was an absolute knowing, and the knowing spoke. The knowing resided within me, although it didn't feel like me. Slowly over the years, this knowing would begin, gently and almost imperceptibly, to take over my identity, like an unevictable tenant slowly occupies one apartment, and then, day by day, all other units as well. I kissed her face. Her skin felt like delicate sheets of lace beneath my lips. My grandmother had been mostly touch-averse. She loved deeply and fully, but did not express her love through physical contact. I am not sure if she had lived behind this wall of protection while still married to my grandfather, or whether she had constructed the wall after he had left her for a woman my mother's age. Either way, she was not a cuddler. I was always a hugger, though. As I was growing up, I would come into our living room, where Grandma was knitting one of her intricate Argyle sweaters or Afghans, the patterns of which she solved mathematically in equations beyond the capacity of my school teachers. I'd leap onto her lap from behind or from the side, throwing my arms around her neck and planting kiss after kiss on her face. "Enough, enough," she'd say as she pushed me away lovingly. "Enough, enough." But that night, she just lay there and let me kiss her. I chanted Sanskrit mantras for her, the few that I knew, the ones we sang in morning prayers and the evening arti, over and over. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayah Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kashchid Dukha Bhag Bhavet. That means, may all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all experience that which is auspicious, and may no one suffer. Om Dharyam Lakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushti Vardhanam Urvarukam Iva Bandhanan Mrityor Mukshiyamamritat. That means, O Lord, who sees not only with the two physical eyes, but he who sees with the third divine eye. O Lord, who sustains and nourishes the world, O Lord, please release me from the bondage of disease and death and grant me divine immortality. Let me become one with you so that I am free from the disease and death of this world. Forgive my improvisation on the melody and rhythm of those. I rested on my side next to her, my right hand on her head, my left hand on her leg as I mixed mantras with wet kisses. Suddenly, my grandma turned her head toward me with her lips puckered up. None of the rest of her body moved, and her eyes did not open. Her puckered lips led the way and carried the rest of her head a full 180 degrees to her left side where I lay. After more than an hour of stroking, kissing, and singing to a body whose life force was departing, I was face to face with a pair of plump, eager, puckered lips. I gave her a big kiss, moistening her dry lips with my tears, and a few moments later, her head returned whence it had come, again hanging limply on her right side. She never moved again before passing away the next afternoon. She waited for you to come home, my mom told me as we drove together back to Los Angeles. She waited to say goodbye. I believe that, but not for sentimental reasons. I do not think my grandmother waited for a hug or a kiss. I do not believe she waited to hear my voice or to see me one last time without opening her eyes. I do not believe she waited to say goodbye. Rather, I believe she waited because she needed to hear what only I could tell her, that it was okay to let go. American Jewish culture, and particularly the American Jewish upper class and upper middle class culture, and even more particularly, the culture of my family, has perfected the art of control. We are micromanagement experts. There is a right way and a wrong way to load the dishwasher. At 6:45 p.m., it is already late for a 7 p.m. engagement. The ringing phone in the middle of the night is the police calling to tell you that your child is dead. The sky is falling. Some of this anxiety stems from a very real and deeply serious history of persecution. The sky did fall on the Jews. However, the science of anxiety perfected by many American Jews is one that tragically kills us psychologically long before the things we fear kill us physically. I'm not sure about the horse-cart sequencing of American Jewish anxiety and whether it is caused by or simply coexists with a history of persecution. It is, however, very common. As there is usually no tangible, specific threat in our daily lives, the anxiety in my family and many other people I know gets projected onto the nearly absurd. The grocery store is out of what we want, we're late for an appointment, the person we're supposed to meet is late, there's unexpected traffic on the freeway, the neighbor's dog is barking and keeping us awake. We grasp desperately for a semblance of control over our immediate world and everything that gets eaten, drunk, purchased, worn, or said within it. It is a sincere, albeit misplaced, attempt to not feel our own deep fear 24/7. My grandmother was a master at the fervent attempt to control the uncontrollable, to know the unknowable by holding tenaciously to each thread in the tapestry of her own life. She was brilliant, and at the time when only 3% of women completed college and barely 20% entered the workforce, she got 2 master's degrees and started her own business. We used to joke that we'd be billionaires if only Grandma would be a contestant on Jeopardy! She knew every single answer to every question, and the ignorance of the contestants drove her crazy. Oy vey, I would hear her say from the living room as I did my homework upstairs. They are idiots! Doesn't anyone know anything anymore? In the nearly 90 years of her life, she taught herself to succeed, thrive, and then survive when Grandpa left her. She was a warrior, a woman I never saw cry even once, but she didn't know how to let go. How could she let go of things she had spent almost 90 years holding together? How could she relinquish control after holding tightly for so many decades? How could she loosen the vice grip and how could she loosen the vice grip and breathe into the universe? This is, of course, an affliction that not only burdened my grandmother, that not only burdens Jews in America, but burdens most Americans as well. We cling tightly to things we believe we can control in order to minimize our anxiety over the things we know we can't control. Unfortunately, this technique doesn't work. Controlling my weight, or my spouse's driving, or how the dishwasher is loaded does not resolve our fear of loss and change. Amassing great wealth or fame or beauty or trophy partners cannot overcome the fear of ego self-dissolving. Non-solutions though they may be, we all pursue them. We build security towers in our castle of the self, while the whole thing sits on a shifting sand, to be called back into the ocean with the next incoming tide. So, all my grandmother needed to hear was something I had to go to India to learn. It's okay to let go. Where we are going is beautiful. Nothing will happen to the true self. It is only the old, ill, or broken body that is changing. She needed me to sing her clenched fist open, to kiss her as she let go of her death grip on the threads of life. I closed my eyes as my mom drove up the 405 back to LA and gave thanks for the knowing that had come to reside in the complex of myself and that spoke through me to my grandmother. She had insisted that there will be no funeral. She didn't want to be buried. She didn't want people to come and cry over her grave or feel guilty for not coming. She wanted to be cremated. Spiritual injunctions, augmented by visceral memories of the Holocaust, have made cremation anathema in Jewish culture. This is that word that I think I still have yet to really learn, especially how to pronounce anathema. But my grandmother wanted to be cremated. When we got her ashes back from the crematorium, I prepared them in a box to carry with me back to India to offer to the waters of the Ganga River. In a special ceremony, my grandmother would, finally, with assistance from the goddess Ganga, be free. After the cremation, I went to the Bay Area and emptied my storage unit. I sold almost everything I owned, gave away most of the rest, and drove back to LA with the remaining possessions in the back seat of my Honda, with plenty of room for me to see out of the rear view mirror. I sang at the top of my lungs along with Cat Jims 1 minute and along with Hindu devotional singers the next. I returned to Los Angeles for the 2 final days of sitting Shiva, a week-long period of mourning in the Jewish tradition, not actually connected to Lord Shiva in Hinduism. When her Yahrzeit candle, I'm not sure how to pronounce this Hebrew word, Yahrzeit, when her Yahrzeit candle finished burning in our living room, I returned home to India, carrying her ashes. Pujya Swamiji and I decided that the best date to immerse Grandma's ashes in Ganga would be Mahashivratri, the day dedicated to the worship of Lord Shiva. In Hindu tradition, Shiva is the destroyer, but not a destroyer in the negative sense of razing all that is good. Rather, Shiva destroys, dissolves, and dissipates to make room for the new creation of Lord Brahma, the Creator. On Mahashivratri, Devotees stay awake all night with prayers that Shiva should remove them from all that is keeping them from enlightenment, all that is blocking and thwarting their path. It is, next to Krishna Janmashtami, the birthday of Lord Krishna, and Diwali, probably the holiest day on the Hindu calendar. In February, the river Ganga runs low. Mountain glaciers are frozen and the weather is dry. Without rain or melting glaciers, the flow is calm and relatively shallow compared to the fullness of her movement in summer when she overflows her banks. Typically in winter months, the riverfront was flanked by 50 to 100 feet of rocks. One had to walk far out onto the rocks just to touch her. However, in 1998, unseasonal rain began the day before Shivaratri and didn't let up until that late afternoon, by which time Ganga had risen, submerging the rocks and touching the foot of our marble platform. "She came for your grandmother," Swamiji said with a smile. I walked down the steps to the river bank, holding most of my grandma's ashes in a bronze kalash, or pot. The rest sat in the original box from the crematorium in my closet at my parents' house, adorned with my own necklaces as substitutes for flower garlands. We decided to keep some of her ashes in case any of the other family members later felt that they wanted them. In the 20+ years since, no one has. Still today, Grandma's remaining ashes occupy a special place in my closet, my faux amethyst necklace draped adoringly over the brown box. I walked alone, holding Grandma with both hands, careful not to trip, lest she fall out of the pot. A group of yellow-clad priests joined me and chanted the appropriate Sanskrit mantras. The ceremony had to be official, I felt, and it wouldn't be without the proper chanting of Sanskrit mantras. In the last year, Grandma had asked me endlessly, "Why India? Why not Israel? You can find a good rabbi in Israel." Thus the irony of sending her off into eternity in a Vedic ceremony wasn't lost on me, but it felt important. It was the only way I knew to properly honor her life after death. "I love you, Grandma," I whispered as I knelt and poured her ashes into the flowing river. "Ganga has come to take you. It will all be so beautiful for you. I promise." I rose from the banks of the river, and following the compulsory shower and hair wash after coming into contact with ashes, served dinner for the saints and priests in the dining hall. Walking up and down the long rows, I respectfully put a red tilak, the Hindus' ornamental red spot on their foreheads between the eyebrows, and handed each 50 rupees. According to Hindu tradition, feeding religious people is considered not just a generous act, but also an auspicious one, particularly in memory of a loved one. I smiled to myself and shared a private laugh with my grandma as I bent down low and handed round sweet balls of flour, sugar and ghee called laddus to the saints. I bet you never imagined this. A send-off with lots of food. My grandma had been on strict diets as long as I had known her. Rice cakes, chicken broth, Beeler's broth, which is a nauseating, nearly calorie-less soup made from blended string beans and zucchini, and other inedibles constituted her food intake for the last decades of her life, as she tried fervently but unsuccessfully to rid herself of a few unwanted pounds. All the saints and priests, draped in orange, white, and yellow robes, offered a prayer from my grandmother as I bent to serve them. Later that night, when I left my office to go back to my room, I went back to Ganga to say thank you. In the short hours, few, since the ceremony, She had receded into the middle of the riverbed, exposing 100 feet of rocks between the water and our hut. Thank you for listening. We will pause our reading there for now. That concludes the 29th chapter. You're going somewhere beautiful. Clearly, our grandmother meant a lot to our author. And I think it's so beautiful that she dedicated a whole chapter to honoring the departed and recognizing the value of affirming those who are departing. That knowingness has crept into her life, as it does, I hope, creep into all of yours too as we read. I just love how at that ceremony in the end, one way of honoring her was to serve others. And I think that's something we can make room for in the ceremonies that we have to go through in our culture too. We can imagine giving lots of love to those whom are leaving this world for the next. But we can also give lots of love to others as they would have wanted or as they would have been empowered to do so with purpose. So I trust that we all find these passages relatable, dear Maggie, as I sure do. Thank you for listening again, and namaste.